Hello and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. I am Jonathan Gellner, and thank you so much for joining us today. On today's show, we have on Curt Nelson, professional hitting consultant and the Northwest Bandits head coach. Curt works with players from the big leagues to the little league. So on the show, we discuss what his evaluation process looks like from when a person walks into the door for the first time to fine-tuning professional hitters' mechanics. We dive deep into hitting mechanics, game planning, timing, and so much more. This episode is so good, and have your notebooks ready, because here is Curt Nelson. Curt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Definitely. And today I'm really excited for today's conversation because I know we're going to dive deep into all things hitting mechanics, game planning, timing, all of it. And so I really, I want to encourage our listeners to get a notepad and pen ready if they haven't already. But while they're doing that, can you give us a short snapshot of your baseball background and why you decided to get into coaching?
Yeah, I was playing in about 13 years ago, playing college baseball, and just kind of knew that I wanted to get into coaching, and just kind of got hooked up with one of my better friend's dads who was running an organization out of our area. He'd been a longtime youth coach out here. His name's Ray Atkinson, and I got involved with the organization he was coaching in called the Northwest Bandits, and just started doing some offside hitting lessons and just kind of, just easing into that kind of coaching kind of realm, and just kind of took off from there. And it's always been about giving back, and I've had a awesome opportunity in my career of learning from so many different coaches, and whether that was as a player or as a coach now, it's always been about, trying to search for that best way to get the hitter you're working with to get to the next level with their career and their swings. And that whole process has just been an absolute blessing and so fun to do. So, that's kind of why I got into it originally. It was where I kind of saw myself heading in life, and what I wanted to do was impact players the way that I was impacted by some of these great coaches and dads and friends around us. So, that's the short story to the long story, but we got the best job in the world besides playing.
I love it. And the friend you're referring to is Cody. So you guys played together in college, right?
We did. Yeah, we did. We played for a couple of years together at Everett Community College. We also grew up playing for the Seattle Stars, and he was kind of on the younger team. My team was a year older, and we were kind of, world beaters, if you want to say it. We got national trophies left and right, and we were always ranked in the higher rankings of select baseball back then. So that was a lot of fun and really an incredible experience. So I've actually known Cody since he was probably 12, 13 years old, and I've known his dad since the same time. But we really got a lot closer in college and, playing together. And then we actually started coaching together. Actually, the first team we ever coached was a 13-year-old team. I was 21, he was 20 years old. And kind of the rest is history a little bit. We actually coached together at Everett Community College for 3 years, and we got to win a championship there, which was really exciting. And that was kind of the beginning of his college coaching career. And then obviously we all know that that's taken off into professional rankings and whatnot. So we're extremely excited for him on that front. But I've known him for quite some time. So it's been a pleasure getting the chance to work side by side with someone that's so talented and gifted in what he does.
Oh, definitely. And I haven't known him as long as you have, but I could definitely say the same thing. It definitely is a pleasure. And I think that I've told several people this, I think I learn something every time that he presents or every time that he talks, which is, for being a learner is somewhat, I don't want to say rare, but it's a really neat thing to be able to do whenever one of your coworkers is like that. And I know you feel the same way, but let's go ahead and talk about you, and let's talk about just some different things that you've got going on. So like you said, you work for Ray, Cody's dad, Ray Atkinson, and you guys, he owns a facility out there. And so let's say that a player walks in the door, okay, for the first time, what are some different things that you do to evaluate that player?
Yeah, I think it's going to kind of depend on the level of the player, right? The level of player is going to kind of dictate some of the different routes. If a professional is walking through the door and I haven't worked with them before, there's a lot of research that's going to be done. I've heard the name deep dive a few different times kind of comes to mind. And really, you're going to pretty much pull up game video from, that year, previous years, you're going to pull up. Baseball Savant is a phenomenal resource for looking up some of the advanced stats and some of the data that we can utilize. So we're going to know more about those type of players going into it and doing our research, previous to that. So I think that you have a little bit better idea of what you're getting into than maybe a 13, 14-year-old kid that walks through the door for the first time that you've just never seen swing, right? So it's going to be a little bit different route on those. But let's just, hypothetically speaking, we'll just say that, a 14-year-old kid walks through the door for the first time. Realistically, I'm not going to implement anything. I want to see him move first. I want to watch him do what he does and just get a feel for how's he moving, what's he thinking, just trying to pick his brain, as he's kind of going through maybe his little warm-up process if he has one, asking him, whether, what he's thinking about, what he's trying to do, what he's been taught. And I think the more information that we can gain, before we start jumping into some changes, the better we're going to be. We're going to look at the setup. We're going to look at how he's moving in relationship to time. What's the relationship with the ground? Obviously, the bat path, are we staying in the zone? Are we short and compact? All the small details you're going to look at, they kind of all add up to a bigger picture of maybe what he's thinking or what he's been taught. So, if we can change the mind first, it's going to be easier to make some adjustments than just trying to force feed some adjustments to somebody or just throwing drills on someone for no reason, right? I think mobility plays a ginormous role. A lot of hitters are moving from positions that might not be the right position for their bodies. So realistically, we got all of our movement prep stuff. We got all of our, drills that we can apply, but we have to do it individually. It's got to be individually based upon that per individual. And really, to us, there's really no absolutes. There's some things that are pretty darn close. Timing, balance, path, like those things are going to be relatively close to absolutes, but there's really no such thing. I mean, everyone's a little bit different. You got to find the best route for that individual. So I think it's a cool opportunity every time someone new walks through the door is to, it's almost a new puzzle. And they're obviously coming to hit with you because they want to hit better and they want to continue to progress and get better. So that individual route per that guy is going to be a really fun experience. And it's a little bit different for each guy, but I think the level of play and, what information you have on that hitter going into it is important. And then figuring out how they think in relationship to that is going to be enormous.
No, I love that. And so whenever you're talking with an amateur player that you can't really deep dive on, what are some different questions that you like to ask? And I'm thinking, for our listeners, a lot of them are in the amateur realm, and I would say most are. And so if they're wanting to ask better questions to, obviously get a better answer and understand where the player is and why they're doing certain things, what are some different ones that you'd like to use? I know you said everything's individualized, but there may be some questions that are better that get a better answer.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to look at some like more generic type questions in that kind of setting. And then once you kind of get a little feel for that, then you can kind of be a little bit more specific, like asking a hitter what their timing mechanism is. What's your timing mechanism? Most hitters probably don't have one. What's your thought on your bat path? What are you trying to do to the baseball? What's your approach right now? What are you working on when you're sitting on a tee or you're in front of a mirror or you're, with your dad in the backyard? Like, just really generalized, specific questions. You can kind of go off of those simple, more generic questions, but you're really just trying to get a feel for kind of where he's at. How do you think your hips are moving? That's a big one for me, is I talk a lot about how a lot of young hitters are trying to rotate their hips. So they end up trying to do that above the ground instead of getting to the ground and then utilizing the ground as our number one source of leverage and power to a certain degree. So, that's a big one for me, is going to be, what are you thinking that your lower body's doing? Because a lot of guys are thinking about using their legs, they're thinking about using their feet. And in relationship, it's about the core and the ground, right? So that's going to be more of a specific question. But I think that, any kind of question that's going to just give you a little bit more insight on what that hitter's really, truly trying to do to that baseball. Ball flight's also going to tell you a lot, right? You're going to watch ball flight. You're going to see how that thing's coming off the bat, and some guys just go in there and they're just hooking everything down third base line, flying open and spinning. And you're like, okay, how much of that is a bad mechanic and how much of that is just a terrible approach and really not understanding what he's trying to do to the baseball? that's a very simple adjustment sometimes for guys, is just to change, what you're trying to do to the ball, or what kind of part of the ball you're trying to attack, right? So sometimes that cleans things up immediately. So the simplest routes are always the best routes. Sometimes things are a lot less simple, and hitting is a very confusing thing. So anytime you can take something that's relatively confusing and make it simpler and help that hitter understand it better, I think we're taking the right route there for sure.
No, I love that, and again, this is kind of it's a tough conversation because you work with guys literally from little league all the way up to the big leagues, and so let's just go ahead and dive in. So let's say that you have a player that you are working with, and you have been for a while, so you guys have come up with a plan of improvement together, or some key performance indicator, whatever it is. But let's say that they walk into the door. Let's say that it's me. So whenever I walk into the door, what are some of the first things that I would do whenever I got there?
We're going to activate. We're going to activate first. I think, especially with just a lot of hitters and baseball players in general, just specializing in baseball nowadays, and not playing football or basketball, or staying active in some different sports throughout the year. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's important to understand that we are a rotational sport, and our engine is our spine and our core. And at that point, we have to make sure that we are capable of withstanding that rotational, movements. So getting activated for us is going to be numero uno. You're going to get in here, you're going to hop on a bike, you're going to go over in our little weight room area, and you're going to be able to kind of loosen up and get your body activated. We also have a bunch of movement prep stuff that are kind of based on some good moving pieces that we believe in with the swing. So it not only kind of gets the body working in the right way in terms of the mechanics of the swing, but it's also activating that body and getting that body more loosened up and ready to actually swing a bat fast, right? So that's going to be probably the first thing they're going to do, is they're going to hop in, they're going to head over into the weight room area, they're going to get fully activated, they're going to jump through all their movement prep stuff. And the movement prep stuff is really good stuff. There's a few different drills that we do with some ball slams against the wall. There's what we call RMT club. That's actually WEC method, just a warm-up club that we kind of swing around a little bit and loosen up with that thing. And then we jump onto a little bit of a PVC drill where we kind of work on stopping, and just kind of what I've kind of heard termed as hitting your brakes, and just kind of activating the core, activating the backside, activating the body, getting the body loosened up. We really, we kind of, want to make sure that all those different pieces in the swing are loosened up and ready to fire before we really start jumping into it. So they kind of get here a little early, they get through that. And then after that, they're going to hop onto a new tool that we have that I can't quite talk about yet. I think we'll probably be having a podcast here in about a month or two, where we're probably going to have an entire podcast talking about it. So it's kind of, my lips are sealed on this one, but it's pretty special. So I know for a fact that it's going to be here to stay, and it's a pretty cool device that I've had a pleasure, and I know that you've had a pleasure of trying out as well. So we'll get onto that in the future, but that's part of our activation as well. And I think that it's a pretty special deal. So once you get through all of that stuff, you're ready to go. I think you're pretty ready to go compete. Obviously, you haven't seen any timing or anything yet, but our bodies are ready. We've prepped ourselves, and now it's time to go hit, right? So then at that point, if I have another session, then as they're finishing up their movement prep, as long as they know how to do it correctly, assuming that they've been with me for a while, they do, then they're able to, kind of switch over and transition, and then they're hopping in while the next group's hopping out, and we're going from there. So obviously with COVID, it's a little bit different in terms of how many guys we can have in the cage and kind of how we're going through the protocols and being ultra safe. So, but at the end of the day, that's kind of how you're going to look at walking through the door and kind of activating and getting going. And then we'll progress through your routines based on the individual. All my hitters have different routines. They're not all doing the same thing. Even with my team, I coach an 18-year-old team for the Northwest Bandits. And when we have our teams in here, I got guys divided up into groups kind of based off of what their routines are, because there's always going to be some similarities between guys. These guys are flattening out their barrels and they got to work path. These guys are spinning their hips on top of the ground. They got to work on getting ground connection that day. They try and kind of put them into groups and individualize within those smaller group settings. And that's kind of how we attack the team stuff a little bit as well. So, and then you progress through their warm up and their kind of their daily drill stuff that's kind of, locking them individually in. And then you can kind of start getting into into some of the angle stuff and some of the challenge stuff and going from there, So, ultimately it's going to be that combination of, getting the body ready to go, continuing to build within some of our individual drills, and then you got to challenge flat out.
No, that's really, really good. And I know that we were talking off air, and so we're gonna dive deep into mechanics and do. I know Curt's gonna do a fantastic job of explaining, different things that he sees, even though we're on audio. Let's just go ahead and start with setup. So let's, like you mentioned, there may not be any absolutes, but there are a lot of guys do this, right? And you can depending on how you move, depending on how you finish, how you work through the zone, it all depends. But I truly think everything starts with setup. And so we're going to start there. As soon as you walk into the box, as soon as you step into the box, what does a good setup mean to you?
Well, we're all pretty blessed to have learned about the importance of a good setup from the great Doug Latta. From the second that I started talking hitting with him about 6-7 years ago, that was immediate how important he believed in the setup stuff. And you can just see it. I mean, the getting in the right position for that hitter is just immediately going to translate to a better move, a cleaner move, a more consistent move. So a quality setup to me is going to be in relationship to each individual, but you got to have balance. And I think balance always starts with the head. The head's always got to be in the center. Everything's got to be done between the feet. And, getting in a setup where guys are not getting into the quads and the knees. I see so many young hitters that are like, hey, get in your legs. And what does that mean? And I think in sports, we look at sports as an athletic movement just in general. And so people always talk about being on the balls of your feet, or I've always heard like guarding somebody in basketball. And hitting is done a lot more flat-footed than people think it is. So when we get on the balls of our feet in the box, immediately my weight's in my knees, the weight's, it's in my quads. It's not in a balanced position. It's not going to promote me moving in balance. It's not going to promote me getting connected to the ground better. So ultimately we're looking for the glute. We're looking for the butt. We're looking for the center of gravity, and some guys are wider. You look at Chris Bryan, I think he's got a great move, and it really works for him within his body type and what he likes. But, is that move the right move for everybody? No, you look at Bellinger, it's the complete opposite, right? So you kind of try and find that move that's based on comfort, but it all kind of starts from that setup position, and you're always going to go off balance. And balance is kind of like one of those ones where, like, if I'm balancing on one foot, like people think of that as balance. And really that's just like our capability of balancing, right? Like the actual human body in balance. You go look at one of those hanging skeletons in science class, you're going to see what the human body in balance actually looks like, right? The head's between the feet, everything's between the feet, and it's like a 3DX, right? Everything kind of has a counter move to when we start moving in different ways. So setups to us is going to be so important because it kind of sets you up to move better. It sets you up to move more consistently. And it's a little bit different for everybody. You got to find that right position for them. Sometimes it's the mobility stuff, setting up the back foot in the right position, based on, maybe some ankle mobility or some hip mobility. Sometimes it's just, hand placement or front shoulder placement, based on getting that body in balance. These athletes that we're working with, especially the guys at the highest levels, they're some of the best athletes in the world, right? And some of the best athletes in the world are also some of the best compensators. You can go on Major League Baseball and go find, a whole bunch of hitters that don't move the exact same way that maybe I'm trying to get a specific hitter to move like, but that doesn't mean it's not better, right? It just means that, he just doesn't move that way, and he might be actually compensating, but he's just such a good athlete that he can compensate and get away with that. So we're really not trying to get away with anything. We're trying to maximize each individual, to maximize what they're capable of doing, so it's good stuff.
No, I really like that a lot. And so again, I'm going to throw out some different things that I know, that you like. And luckily for our listeners that I know you well enough, and I know your methodology behind it, so we can dig deep into this. But whenever you're talking about a setup, let's just go over, give us a drill, or, I know that you're big into mirror work. Is it something that I mean, we now understand the methodology behind what you're trying to teach. And now what are some ways that you put them in a setup, or you give them a drill to help with and again, setup can mean a lot of different things, and balance can mean a lot of different things. But what are some different things that you do as far as just helping them feel a good setup, understand what that means?
Yeah, I love the mirror. I think the mirror just doesn't lie. We talk a lot about video. Video is great, but it's after the fact. You can take a round on video, and then you can go sit down afterwards and look at what you were doing. But in a mirror, it's instant. It's right as you're doing it, you can see. Right. So maybe we're talking about someone that's getting set up with a lot of weight on their front foot, and they're a little out of balance in their first move. They have to push off the ground and shift back. So when you get in the mirror, you're going to see that. We're going to see that, and we're going to be able to feel that a little bit different. So, sometimes I got a little bit of an X on one of my mirrors at the top, kind of where the head's at, and we'll put the forehead right in the center of the X, just kind of when they're standing next to the mirror, get a chest on the mirror. And then, we'll say, okay, let's keep your head in that X as we're lifting our stride leg, so we can see that our upper body's not shifting backwards as we're picking up. Very simple drill to do, but again, it gives them a little bit of a goal within just kind of moving. And then there's kind of manipulating how they're lifting to try and find that setup that's going to promote, lifting with as least amount of shifting back as possible. So that's a very simple drill you can do. I really believe in some of the reverse training. I think it's concentric and eccentric. Is basically we do like a little like stride drill where you have to make your move like over a bat, or we'll have like a piece of wood, like a 2x4 will be set down in front of your front foot. And you just got to make an athletic move over the board. I'm actually doing it as we're talking right now at the cage. And it's a clean move. Yeah, it's a clean move over the board. But they also have to be able to make a clean move back to their setup from the same position. And you see the guys that are crashing forward and the guys that are kind of diving and landing, with all their weight on their front foot. Those guys are going to have to push off to reverse, right? So it's kind of a stride out to 50-50 and then actually work reverse to your setup. And just getting that kind of, forward and back, and finding that balance within those moves, whether it's on the way down or it's actually on the way back to the setup. I think that there's a lot of value in doing that. And honestly, we put hitters on the mirror sometimes for an hour. You got a guy that comes in here and he's hitting for, 20 minutes and, the move's not clicking. It's like, hey, get in front of that mirror until it really clicks, and just, spend some really quality time just kind of feeling it out and figuring out within some of the parameters we're talking about how your body needs to move to accomplish this. And if they can't find it, then we're probably looking at the move in general as potentially not the right move for somebody, right? I don't see a lot of people teaching Goldschmidt's move and Nelson Cruz's foot down early move. You just don't see those moves being taught very long or very often. And it's like, man, like those work for those guys at the highest level for a long time. That's proven that they can do it. And, so there's not going to be a specific move I'm going to teach to everybody. But sometimes it's kind of trial and error, right? You got to kind of trial and error that a little bit, see what translates and what doesn't. Just because it might work in flips does not mean it might, it works at 60 feet. You got to test it out, So the drills in the mirror to me is going to be super valuable just because you're seeing what you're doing in real time, and ultimately there's no fooling balance. And I think that if you can have a little marker on your head or something where they're just a little bit more aware of kind of where they're at in space, it's going to be huge for them. So,
really good. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to try and explain that, because doing it over audio, and you're doing a fantastic job, but it's definitely not easy. So now we've talked about the setup, and the next thing, what I'm assuming, I think you use the term gather into your forward move. So what is that? Again, best way you can do it. What does that look like for you? What are you looking for? What are some different key moments or points that you're looking for? And as obviously give us all that you can through audio, but it's definitely tough. But what do you got on that?
The term gather, as far as I know, it came from Craig Wallenbrock and some of his guys. And just the idea of it is that, we're not just jumping forward. We don't want to jump at the ball. Now, some guys are going to be pretty simple. Bellinger kind of feet together and just kind of moves out. Bellinger really doesn't have much of a gather. He's kind of just a go. Right. So it's going to be individually based on, whether someone's actually truly, what some people might consider a gather. But really, ultimately, we're trying to load against the back leg and the back foot, because we don't want to load over the top of it. It is the shifting back, getting over the back foot is really our body getting out of balance. And some guys can do it a little bit and compensate and get back into balance and be relatively consistent doing it. And to each his own. But it's really not what we're teaching. It's not what we believe in. We're really trying to promote a forward move for timing. And within that, gathering into the back leg and into the inside part of the back leg and the inside part of the back foot really creates, I think for some, it keeps the body together. It keeps us from reaching. A lot of guys want to kind of shift back and then load the hands on the back move. And, when you continually watch, great swings from years and years, you're not seeing the hands loading up on a back move for the most part. I'm sure there's 5 guys you could probably find that do it to a certain degree, but they're still within balance to a certain degree in different shapes or forms. But ultimately, I really truly believe that the gather is a great move for a lot of young hitters that, especially against velocity that's not great at the younger levels, is sometimes just telling a hitter, hey, I just want you to go on handbrake. They're going to be lunging in way too early against some of these slow pitchers. So creating a little bit more sense of rhythm and tempo within kind of that gather, but making sure everything's staying together is going to be huge for that. I think that when you're talking about gathering, you're kind of looking at the stride leg is kind of working kind of underneath the front shoulder or underneath the front hip. We're kind of picking up underneath ourselves. And it just kind of keeps that foot from kind of wanting to reach out. You see those guys that kind of, sit back and kind of separate and kind of have that reach move and kind of get stuck over that back leg. And then at that point, there's a lot of panic. There's a lot of spin. We don't have the ability to drive that posterior chain through the baseball, big word for our backside. So ultimately, I think that the gather is just a one way to talk about how we're kind of getting our weight ready to move, ready to time, without kind of leaking backwards and shifting back too much. So the gathers, I like the word too. The word just kind of, to me, just kind of resonates very well and just kind of natural. It's kind of like almost like the calm before the storm in a way.
Sure. Now, again, I'm trying to help with how to explain this. This is really hard, by the way, to our listeners of explaining these different moves over audio. But whenever you see a gather that's good versus a gather that's bad, I know you mentioned you don't want to shift back. So that's basically, I'm picturing this in my mind of you're shifting like 80% of your weight to your back leg, and maybe your knee goes outside of your foot. Is that kind of what you're explaining? So tell us what to look for whenever we do get the chance to look on video, good versus bad.
Yeah, and I think the good versus bad one is always a tough way to kind of put something, because for every guy that I think is potentially a bad move, they might go out there and hit 300 and do well, right? So it's just like, that's always kind of like that fine line. Like, guys can compensate, guys can do some moves and still make them work. But ultimately, when I'm looking at it, like when that back knee starts to get outside the back foot and starts to bind out, or if the back knee stays in, but the back hip starts to slide away outside the back foot, the back shoulder, the hands, maybe you just draw a line off the back foot, and you just go, just draw a line right there and just press play on the film. And what you're going to see guys that are in balance, nothing ever gets outside that line. Some guys might get the knob, or the hands like right over that line or close to the back foot, but they're really not getting outside of that back foot. And with a lot of big shift guys, especially a lot of young guys, and within a lot of young information that kids are hearing in Little League, take your weight back, take your hands back. Well, now the weight's getting over the back foot. The hands are well outside the back foot. We're immediately out of balance, and there's going to be some form of compensation there at some point to try and regain balance, whether we know it or not. So, the gather to me is if you imagine yourself up against a wall, right? Like my the back of my body's up against the wall and I have to go forward off that wall. Like we're really trying to be able to kind of gather with rhythm without running into that wall and shifting back. That would be kind of a visual that we might be able to see through, without actual seeing video of this. But it's definitely working inside that back foot. I like to see, and this is just kind of a preference, but I like to see the back hip is inside the back knee and the back knee is inside the foot. Right, so you kind of see hip, then knee, then foot, rather than seeing all three stacked over each other or in some other shape or form. So that kind of sets us up for, I've heard the term horse straddle. I've heard the term A-gap. It kind of sets us up to make sure that our backside's not collapsing in as we're landing. It just gets us a more unique ability to get to the ground and then fire, which just promotes more adjustability and better use of the ground, in my opinion. So
sure. No,
good stuff, though.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, obviously there are exceptions to every rule, and we're not locking you into anything, but you're just, again, we're trying to get them to move better, and you've noticed some different people that can compensate for not moving as well because they're elite athletes and just different things like that. So this is all stuff to definitely keep in mind, because there's always an exception to the rule. You mentioned A-gap. Are you talking about like the legs, like somebody's legs, whenever you move out, it should look more of like an A than like a tilted over A, maybe?
Yeah, the A is kind of like when you're getting to the ground, like when guys are getting to their 50-50 launch, and you kind of look at the knees and then the lower body. I've also heard the word horse straddle. I believe that both of those kind of terminologies have came from the Wallenbrock crew as well. But yeah, it's kind of like, it looks like you're kind of straddling a horse. So you kind of have that little bit bigger gap between your knees. And everyone's mobility is a little bit different. Like you look at Yelich, he's not going to have a giant gap between his knees. His knees are more pinched in, so, and his mobility is going to be completely different than, someone like Mike Trout's. Ultimately it's just like, how are we getting to the ground? And then are we still having our backside when we're in the ground to fire with? If my backside's already gone because I've lost my heel connection, or my back knee is just, completely gone, then at that point, we've lost all our power. Our butt, our glute is our power.
Okay, so as we're picking up our front foot underneath our front hip, what is the role of the back foot? Because I think in my notes here you said that you wanted to hold it down as long as possible. And earlier you said you didn't want anyone to get on their toes to engage their quads. And so you're just basically talking about, as the front foot picks up, you want the heel to get into the ground and hold it.
Yeah, heel connection is huge. And obviously I think when you start to see, if I throw you a 97 in, your back heel might come up a little bit earlier and you hit a home run, right? So it's like some of that's just kind of a byproduct of different timings and pieces. But the guys that are out of that back heel, we do a little quick test, and everyone that's listening to this could probably do this right now, is if you get to like a 50-50 hitting position and then you pop your back heel up out of the ground, try and flex your back butt cheek. And you really can't. And if you can't flex that butt cheek, you don't have your glute. It's gone. So at that point, you've pretty much lost your power. And you've started your kinetic chain at that point, right? So if we can get to flat feet and then launch, now we're truly going to maximize the force that we can create off the ground. And then I have that backside to be able to thrust through that ball to create, more effortless power. That's kind of what we see a lot of times on the old rap sodos and some of the hit track stuff, is guys are trying to create production and force production with the upper body. And it's a very forceful move, and it really, opens up some different holes in the swing that these pitchers are pretty good at, kind of pumping it in there on us. And at that point, you get a scouting report against yourself that you can't touch a slider down and away. The game gets a little bit tougher, right? So to me, it's the value of getting the flat feet and utilizing the ground properly. It's going to promote more adjustability and give you just more solutions to different problems that you might have, in terms of what you're facing and what they're doing for you or where they're throwing you. So
sure.
That's huge. The heel connection stuff, you got to be careful, because you don't want a guy to start getting stuck on his back foot, overthinking something. I think that's really always a good reminder is like, whatever we're doing, we're trying to make it done athletically as possible. And that's where the setup, I think, becomes so important, and the move from the setup becomes so important, because if my move is better from my setup, then I'm probably more likely to get to the ground with my back heel in the ground still, at least more consistently. than before. So that's always the route I'm going to look for. I want to look for the root cause, right? I want to look for, what's the ultimate piece that's affecting this. And we're always going to go to timing first. I mean, that to me, you can have the best swing on the planet in flips or tee work, and then all of a sudden, when the timing's off, we throw out, everything we're doing, and we find a way to make contact. And oftentimes we call that a panic swing, and hitters are just constantly getting themselves out because of it. So we improve the setup, we improve the move. The heel connection should be better just by nature of them being in a better position for their body and moving more in balance, right? So that would be the natural way to go about that, And sometimes there's some drills. We do some heels down stuff, where you're just kind of, in a little bit wider base, and you're just keeping both heels in the ground, and we're just working the path without, rotating the ground, rotating our lower body at all. And, our core turns as we swing. Because in a rotational sport, your spine is your engine. You got to rotate your core naturally, right? So as I'm swinging the bat, I'm going to rotate, but I'm trying to keep the back heel on the ground just to get hitters to feel the start of that swing being done kind of without, the actual use of, spinning my hips or popping that back heel up. The heel and the calf, these guys that are just kind of driving the back knee and the heel just kind of pops up early, they're really missing out on a lot of ground force and a lot of different adjustability factors that are built into getting to flat feet.
No, really, really good. And there's a lot of different directions. I do want to come back to timing here in just a minute, but let's keep talking mechanics. And so we've got the gather to our forward move, and you mentioned to 50-50, so 50-50 weight distribution. When you get to that checkpoint, is there anything that you're looking for on video? Like, let's say that you pause at 50-50 on video. Is there anything that you're looking for as far as checkpoints go?
Yeah, first of all, I think you're getting into something that's extremely important, is the context of what guys are doing. It's funny, I sent a video over to a hitting coach a few weeks back because he was talking about drifting. And I had a guy that was, striking the ground at 50-50, and then there was a little bit of a drift or a give into that front leg, and then he smacks a homer. And you're like, man, that looks drifty. He looks like he's getting onto that front foot too much. But there's no context, right? It's side view. You don't know what pitch he's hitting, So he's got he's drifting. He's never going to hit. And you're like, well, that's a breaking ball. He just bought himself time on a breaking ball and hit a homer. That's a phenomenal adjustment, right? So if we don't have the context of what's going on, then how can we really say what the guy's doing, is off by any means? Now granted, if a guy's getting to 50-50 and then constantly drifting onto that front leg on fastballs, then there's probably going to be some issue there, right? So, ultimately for me, when we talk about 50-50, I think a lot of hitters, when we start first working into 50-50, especially with some young guys, they tend to get past 50-50. They tend to be on their front foot. They tend to be lunging and just losing their backside during that process. And that's not the goal. Is really ultimately we don't want to pass 50-50 either. And if it's a breaking ball adjustment or something else, maybe I'm just really early with my timing on the fastball, then that's an adjustment on the fly, right? That's really not the goal. But the goal is to be getting down for best fastball in a good quality hitting position. And ultimately, from foot strike to, fastball timing, you're going to see some certain characteristics start to show up, kind of within that transition, opposed to like on a breaking ball adjustment, you're going to see some different characteristics based on how he saw it. Sure. So it's a little unique, but I think that at 50-50, we're going to look at the head first. Where's the head in relationship to the body? Because in relativity to the human body being in balance, the head's got to be in the center, right? So oftentimes when the hitter's looking at the pitcher and you're looking at video, then you're kind of looking at the side of his head. And we typically are going to go kind of right between the ear and the kind of back eye, I guess the inside eye. And we kind of just draw a line down that, kind of split the head in half and go all the way down to the feet. And, you see a healthy amount of guys that are a little bit behind center. Some guys are a little bit more directly in the center. You look at Trout, I think he's really center. He's like ultimate 50-50 in my opinion. And you look at like Charlie Blackmon and look at what he's doing right now. It's unbelievable. And when you look at him at his launch position, he's not in the same position as Trout. He's more behind center with his head and his upper body, So the old school kind of 60-40 feel, is where some guys might be at. But for me, we're going to try and stay away from that with the upper body as much as we possibly can. If it's a little bit more behind center for an individual and it works for him, great. That's him. That's his individual side of things. And if it's a little bit more in the center of the body, like maybe like a Trout or somebody, that's him. So it's relative to the individual, but I think that there is some common characteristics there at launch position. We talk about a lot about where the hands at launch position. And you see so many guys nowadays are coiling and getting this big old scap load, and really, in my opinion, they're compromising their line. They're compromising their ability to get on plane without disrupting our front side. And that gets us into a whole new kind of scheme of things. And I'm sure you'll take us that route here in a second. But just to get back to, that 50-50 position is ultimately is look at the context first, because you got to make sure that what you're looking at is in relationship to the context that you think it's in,
Yeah, for sure. So let's go ahead and hit on that a little bit while you're talking about it. Whenever this is me trying to understand what you're saying through audio, and so whenever you're saying coil, for you, I think that it sounds like you're saying whenever you're taking the back hip and then like twisting it towards the plate. I guess both hips are connected, but you're taking both hips and you're twisting them more towards the plate while you're moving forward. Is that what I'm trying to, again, with audio, it's kind of tough, but I'm like holding my hands together right now, simulating a hip socket, but basically you're holding the ground with your back leg and then you're taking your hips and moving them more towards the plate in more of like a closed off fashion. So if that is hip coil and that's what you're talking about, what problems does that lead to?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't talking about hip coil. I was actually talking about the upper body, like the shoulders diving in and turning in, the big old scap load of the top hand and back elbow. But the hip coil is kind of, it's being taught a lot, and I think it kind of goes into the individual thing for me is like, if someone's hip is loading up really like definitively, you can see it, but it's happening naturally and it's not affecting the upper body, then that's a phenomenal move. That move really works well. What we fear is we fear the guys that are working on loading the hip and then immediately their shoulders are diving in and turning in and just creating this giant counterbalance move. That to me is where I'm gonna kind of steer away from the hip coil stuff. It should be based on their gather and their move is naturally getting them into the glute. It's naturally loading, what people would call loading that hip up and kind of cocking that hip. I've heard back butt cheek towards the pitcher. I've heard front butt cheek towards the pitcher, whatever you want to call it, that coil, that hip move. If it's natural and you got somebody doing it without thinking, and it's keeping the body in balance at the same time and giving us more control on the forward move, phenomenal, awesome. But the second it starts to get into my upper body, the second it starts to get me out of my line and get me off that ball, I'm going to fear, especially against high-level pitching, I'm going to fear that they're going to have to compensate in one way or another, whether it's cheating on the fastball too much, then now we have a huge hole down in the way on breaking balls, or we're sitting breaking balls and now we're blown away on fastballs, right? So,
great explanation.
Everyone's different, though.
And thank you. Let's preface the episode by saying this all works for somebody, and there are always outliers. So you don't have to, continue to say it just because I'll probably put an asterisk over. This is advice to try with everyone, but obviously there's going to be outliers. You mentioned scap load. What is scap load?
Honestly, you watch the guys kind of teaching it or what they're looking for, and you're seeing that top hand kind of make that kind of like a row-like move where they're pinching the back elbow kind of behind them, and they're taking that top hand and loading it behind them.
Like to their spine?
And people are, it's like, you imagine that if I had my hand on like my top hand on like the white line of the batter's box, and then I'm going to immediately load it off the white line behind me. It's kind of like you're starting a lawnmower or something, like you're pulling to load that top hand back there. And to a certain degree, it's people are constituting it with a power move. And, for us, it's so much more about game hitting, and you start implementing power moves that are taking you off the ball. We're not going to hit better in the game, at least not for the long run of things. So you might take a young guy that's, quote unquote, a punch and Judy type hitter where they just, are just, pushing at the ball too much. And then you put him in that position, he might be better, for that time being, so that's kind of also the level of play you're dealing with, might play a role there. And then obviously, like we always talked about this whole podcast so far, is that everyone's a little bit different. You're going to look at some of these guys on TV and you're going to see some guys that are, scap loading that elbow back there and trapping the hands too much, but their overall ability still allows them to be successful doing that. That's individually based.
Gotcha. Okay, so you mentioned that coil and scap load, and I think the term that you used was takes you off of your line or takes you off of your path. Whenever you're talking about your line or your path, what can you give us an explanation of what that is?
Yeah. I think actually Robert Van Swiyak, somebody that I had the opportunity to talk to about hitting, kind of on and off throughout the last couple of years as well, is he talks about watching the swing start without the shoulders. You want to see somebody kind of drop it into that slot with that back elbow and initiating that swing. You're not seeing the shoulders, getting initiated right away. You're seeing everything kind of develop. And then as we go to rotate, the shoulders are obviously going to move. So when we're talking about the line, getting their hands into a position that now they're free. They have this unique ability to just work basically more direct. Is if I'm trapping my hands behind my body, I tell young kids all the time, I'm not a ghost, right? I can't swing through my body, right? Mm-hmm. So if my hands are trapped behind my head or behind my body, then I have to make some form of a move with my front side, or I have to detach my hands and, basically cast out to get back into line. And at that point, we're working within compensation, and we're just going to be less accurate or have to make our decisions too early. So we're really looking at getting the hands into a position at launch that is more direct. And we like to use the batter's box line. I think that line is a great example. Now, granted, for every guy that walks in my cage, I have multiple guys that their hands are too far away from their body at launch position too. So they're like too far out, So those guys actually would benefit from adding maybe a little bit of like a scap-like move to it just to get their hands into line. So it's a little bit different per individual. And I had a couple pro guys that come to mind that I've actually worked with that, one guy's had to start the hands further away from the body so that they can kind of naturally kind of suck into the body to get into line. And then someone actually had to do the opposite and start them a little bit more over the shoulder and let them kind of work out away from the body to get into line. So it's completely two different routes for two different individuals.
Sure. That's really, really good. And again, thank you for the context there too. So when we get to 50-50, when we get to front foot down, what launches a swing from there? Like what are some different ways that you teach triggering the swing?
Well, that's a tough one. That's always a tough one because the brain is so much different. Everyone's vision's different. Everyone's moving different. So that's going to be a little bit different for everybody. But I think the ultimate thing for me is the ball, right? Like we talk so much about the ball. The ball's going to trigger your swing. So if you're super late getting ready all the time and you're always on your backside and the ball's triggering your swing before you're getting to the ground, I'm going to talk about ground connection for sure and getting to 50-50 and getting to flat feet. But ultimately, the difference there is timing, right? Like if they can get that guy to get ready earlier and get him making his move to see better, then ultimately the ground connection is going to improve right away. So kind of that whole root cause thing is like, okay, one thing leads to another thing. Mm-hmm. What is that main thing that we need to work on first? And understanding better timing is oftentimes one of the best routes for any kind of adjustment, to a certain degree. Obviously, we're going to improve things through some small drill stuff too, and kind of break the swing down into some smaller pieces. But I think the least we can do that, the better off we are, because this breaking swings down into smaller pieces is not natural. It's not game hitting, it's just trying to create a feel. But ultimately, triggering the swing is just going to be solely based off of timing. And I think that our reaction to the pitch itself is going to breed different kind of triggers, right? I think, naturally, if you're sitting fastball timing, you're making a clean move to 50-50, and it's a fastball, 3/4 of the way, and then it turns into a nasty slider down and away. The reaction my body's going to have on that is potentially going to be different than, if I'm, sitting dead red fastball and get the fastball. So it's the open skill training versus the closed skill training, because in a closed skill environment, there's really no variable change. It's really, your outcome the ball's not moving, or the ball's sitting on a tee, or even in like some of these flippies that are just down the middle and slow every time, there's just not enough variable change to, say that that's game hitting. Game hitting is an open skill environment. We have to be adaptable. We have to be able to adjust on the fly. And that's everything. And that's where the trigger stuff can kind of get a little bit tricky, because if I'm forcing somebody to trigger my swing in a certain way, then they might lose the ability to adjust on a certain pitch that they had a solution to before, and you just push that out of them. And we see that a lot. You start seeing that a lot with all these different kind of like, philosophies that these coaches are teaching, is that sometimes they're actually taking hitters' adjustments and actually coaching those out of them to a certain degree. And that's a potential, room for disaster there, because now you're making somebody do something in a forceful manner that is not in relationship to open skill environment or live hitting, right? So that's a tricky one. Ultimately, I would say the ground. I think especially, a couple of years ago, I would 100% say the ground, and I believe that the ground is the ultimate trigger. But you still see guys on 98 in that are, getting the backside going maybe a split second before the front heel's down, and hitting homers on those pitches, and vice versa. So it's definitely going to be based upon adjustability, based upon the individual, based upon, timing of everything. So really good question, though.
Super, super context specific, especially with game video. And you mentioned that earlier, but I think that's something that needs to be said again. So over the last maybe 5, maybe 7, 8 years, there's been a push for barrel depth. And I think I know whenever I was growing up, it was like try and get your hands to the ball out front, and chop down was used a lot, right? And then and now we have barrel depth has been a term that has been used by a lot of people over the last several years, and so just what are your thoughts on what that means? Like what is good depth versus bad? Can you kind of explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty good guy to kind of find that kind of fine line there, because I grew up in the generation of kind of swing down to create backspin. Very kind of check mark, really not kind of behind ball, through ball. It's kind of more down the ball. And then you're trying to stay through the ball, but it's a little bit more difficult, especially as the ball's moving down. And that's kind of what pioneered the whole change in the fly ball generation, is you got, two guys, Craig Wallenbach and Doug Latta, in the early 2000s that are looking at all of the instruction being taught is to swing down and chop. And what are all these major league pitchers doing back then was sinkers, sliders, changeups, splitters, everything moving down. So, they're throwing the ball down with movement down, and guys are pounding the ball into the ground with these choppy swings. So they look at that and go, okay, what's the opposite of that? How do I beat these pitchers now? Okay, well, I got to get my barrel head to get more depth, or get behind the ball earlier, get in the zone earlier, and then carry that through the zone longer, so I have more room for air and I have a little bit more natural, kind of arc coming through. And I think a lot of people would hear that and argue that Ted Williams talked about that a very long time ago, and somehow we all went off that in some shape or form, But I think, you see things kind of come in cycles, right? You see, okay, everyone's pounding the ball down, let's hit the ball in the air. Well, what are the Astros doing right now? The Astros are high spin rate, 4 seams up right now, and carving hitters, at least up until last year. And, they're high spin up in the zone, and these guys trying to hit the ball in the air, whiffing underneath everything, so you kind of see that full circle in the world of hitting. It's almost like nothing's really new. It's the new era is working against this pitch, and then we have to adjust. And it's just going to be a constant kind of adjustment, right? And I think that's where you can start getting into game planning and talking about how you would game plan versus different pitchers based on what you're trying to do to that baseball. It might be a little bit different for each guy. Which is a pretty cool conversation and a lot of fun for hitting, because I love game planning. It's so fun. But ultimately, I truly think that, barrel depth to me is really, it has a lot of different pieces to it, but in the simplest form, it's kind of, your barrel works from up, and then it works down to plane, and then it works through plane, and just maximizing our ability to be late and hit a line drive, and be early and still hit a line drive. I talk a lot about not pulling the ball that's in and not taking the in pitch, or taking the ball away and hitting it away. Is we really don't have time to think at that level, especially against 90-mile-an-hour fastballs and above, is that we can't think. We just got to react, right? So if our job is to take a great swing, whatever that may be, and I'm a little bit early on away. Well, if I'm hitting through it the right way, I should probably pull that ball in the air. I mean, I watch Trout destroys my Mariners all day long on those sliders down and away where he pulls them over the left center fielder's head or over the wall. And, so it just, to me, it's all about the timing of things. And that's really where barrel depth comes into play, is that these guys are so good at that level. So if I have more room for air, I'm better off because of that, immediately. So my misses become better in that way. We all know what it feels like to just get it perfect, that perfect ball middle into left center. But what is it when you're off? What is it when you're late? Is it a line drive up the middle? JD Martinez is a great example. Here's a guy that can take a middle in fastball and hit it out to dead center. And he can take a breaking ball away and hit it out to left field. He can take anything in and pull it to left field as well. It's just timing is going to dictate that a little bit. But I think that, we're trying to be able to hit multiple pitches in the same swing. And that's where barrel depth kind of plays a role, that the ball stays up and it kind of rides through that four seam. My barrel's working into depth, and it's kind of working from up to down in a way. Naturally, then that barrel's going to run through that pitch and be fine. But if that pitch turns into something moving down at the last second, since my barrel's entering on the way down, then I can just continue down and actually make that adjustment mid-swing, So that's a huge bonus, especially against really, really good pitching. In my swing growing up, I was a little steep, I was a little choppy, created a lot of backspin, and I had really, really good hand-eye coordination, so I could get away with it a little bit. I still actually remember I was 18 years old, facing Tyson Ross and Chris Tillman out of Bannerwood over here in Bellevue, Washington, in the regional for Connie Mac. And I just remember that, like, seeing those movements, just being like, I don't know if my swing has a solution to this. I closed my eyes and got lucky a couple of times, but, that's not going to last in the long scheme of things. But
okay, so you talked.
That's a great question. Barrel depth.
Yeah, thank you. So you talked about the barrel working down, and so again, I'm going to try and take what you said, and then I'm picturing it in my mind, and I'm trying to try and see what you meant. So whenever it's working down, so you're talking about elbows coming down, and then barrel head is going like down to the top of the barrel is going to the catcher?
You're not going to force that move to happen. It kind of, like, when we get into, like, I've heard the verbiage lag.
Okay. Like,
as my hands start driving forward, the barrel starts to kind of fall, and it does kind of start to point towards that catcher a little bit. So, like, that's kind of more of a byproduct. I'm not going to ever tell somebody to lay their bat head backwards, or to feel like they're going to hit the catcher's glove in their swing. I think there's different routes that we can take to get that to happen.
Sure.
But a lot of it also is dependent on where the hands are launching from. I think that, and also what the feel is, right? So, like, somebody with higher hand launch position, they're probably going to feel like they're swinging down a little bit more than someone with a lower hand launch position. Someone with a lower hand launch position, maybe like a Justin Turner hand launch position, they're probably thinking a little bit more along the lines of just direct, just kind of forward. And then the barrel will naturally fall. It's kind of what gravity does to that heavier barrel. The barrel, as I'm moving, the barrel just kind of naturally falls under the hands into the zone. And really, as long as we're not manipulating the barrel head and we're launching that barrel with that backside, then that process should kind of naturally happen to a certain degree. I think strength plays a role, and a few different factors there. But ultimately, like, when we're talking about that, what will you look at, like, when people call flat swings? I'm kind of in the verbiage of, like, when I hear someone say a flat swing, I don't consider that a good verbiage. I consider that a bad thing. And in hindsight, I could be sitting here talking to, somebody next to me that's saying a flat swing, and we might be saying the same darn thing, and it's just terminology difference, right? So, like, that's just where it is. But the whole windmill versus, like, kind of Ferris wheel thing, or kind of like a CD, like where you're kind of flat, the terminology we kind of stick with is kind of east to west versus north to south. We're trying to run that barrel kind of more north to south than east to west. And oftentimes a flat barrel at launch position kind of leads into that kind of flat entry, and the bat head wants to make a move out, and then it wants to come across the front side, and you might be strong when the ball's, away from you and you're a little bit late. You might be able to drive the ball to right side pretty successfully, but the second that you're early, you're always capping the ball or whiffing off speed, or you're always getting blown up and breaking bats on balls in. then we're not going to be able to cover the zone in multiple speeds and pitches, and that's what our ultimate goal is, to be able to cover as much of that zone as possible, with success over a long period of time. So, you start seeing a lot more like high barrel at launch position, which kind of promotes the barrel head kind of staying up rather than kind of flattening out. I know there was some stuff being taught for a while, some of the Donaldson stuff where, guys are talking about tipping and then, flattening out the barrel and just turning the shoulders. And it might work for some guys, it might, but I just don't see that being the fix, for a lot of guys. I think that actually hurts more than it helps to a certain degree. But it's all within context. It's all within the individual, like we've been talking about through this whole process. But, that barrel depth, it's definitely vital against great pitching. You can be a little bit more steep and choppy against, average to below average pitching and kind of get away with it with, elite hand-eye coordination and athleticism. So, but we're really trying to find that balance of like what's right for this kid right now. It obviously depends on the level and the age and where they might be getting to, so someone that might not be, wanting to play college baseball, or someone that doesn't want to play at the next level. Let's make sure that what they're doing right now allows them to enjoy it and have fun, and obviously still continue to get better as long as they're playing. But it might not be the same route I take with somebody that I know is going to have an opportunity to play at the next level, at a higher level. It might be a little bit more advanced, a little bit more different for that individual, just based on that. We're looking for more long-term for some guys and potentially a little bit more short-term for others, just depending on that situation of that individual.
I love that. Great explanation, and man, you're doing a fantastic job. I just want to tell you that and commend you for that, because I'm trying to like picture in my mind of the different things that you're saying, and a lot of it definitely makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about timing. I mean, obviously we can't do a show about hitting without talking timing. And I for a long time I thought that timing was innate, and I still think to an extent that it is, and it's our understanding of where our body is moving in space and time. And I think I also think that we can give them some different checkpoints to help them throughout that process if they just feel completely off time. And timing is everything. Like we sat here for an hour and talked hitting mechanics, and like you said, if you're off time, even with perfect hitting mechanics, you're not going to be a very good hitter. But timing is a huge part of it. So walk us through how you would teach timing. Are there checkpoints that you use? And obviously it's all context specific on the hitter and the hitter's mechanics too. But just what are some different things that you use, and how do you teach it?
It's really like if we knew the ultimate answer to teaching timing, we'd all have $1 billion, because that's kind of the intangible that is, quote unquote, the sixth sense of hitting, right? It's like that kind of holy grail of hitting is going to be, how do you teach timing? And I've talked to plenty of hitting coaches that I really respect, that are great hitting coaches, that do say what you just said, is in terms of like hitting and timing is just natural. It's just what they do, for me, I've taught timing for the last 10, 12 years. I think you have to, I've tried all the routes of, like go on this or do this, or, here's your marker here and this checkpoint here. And for some guys, it's having a little checkpoint of just kind of like, hey, you're getting up on handbrake and you're trying to get forward on pitch release. Sometimes that just flat out clicks for them, right? And just showing them video. And I do a lot of rear view video just for watching timing. And our Hack Attack has the auto feeder with the ramp, so we actually have a little bit of a timing mechanism there. Once it hits the ramp, we kind of consider that like handbrake. And then as the ball shoots out, that'd be pitch release, right? So, it gives you a little bit of that mechanism. And when you film from rear view and you watch a guy roast a fastball in the right center gap when he's making a clear-cut forward move, or a move to the ground, it doesn't have to be thought of as forward. It can just be thought of as going to the ground as part of that. To read the pitch, to see the pitch out of hand. And immediately, the very next one, they get stuck over the back leg and the ball's out of the machine and they haven't made their move yet to see, and they get blown up and they spin and fly open or whatever it is. So if you show them that, you say, look, like here's a clear-cut move to see, here's a go to see versus a sit and read, and then here's the next one where you struggled, where you're sitting and reading. Just by showing them that context and like here's the difference in the timing of things, that can really help promote that, But ultimately, some guys can't sit in the box and sit up there and go, okay, where's handbrake, where's handbrake, where's handbrake? You're thinking way too much, you're screwed, right? So at that point, it's so vital that you're training that move to start at that time without thinking. That's the ultimate key to it. And I think that's where the best guys at timing, probably don't think much about timing. They just naturally move more on time just based on the reps that they've done in their lifetime or what they've been working on specifically in relationship to timing. And then it just translates over, right? Like when I get a lot of guys on the internet that are sending me video of their hitters, guys they work with, or players that just send me their videos. And I like to help anybody I possibly can. Sometimes it takes me a couple of days to get back to them, but, typically I'm getting back to everybody to some shape or form. And, when we're looking at it, they're typically sending flips. They're sending, side view without any context of what they're facing. And my first response to everyone is always, where's the game film? Do you have game film? Game film is like the all for me, is that, some guys move a little bit differently in flips and a little bit differently in the cage than they might in the game. And we want to know the difference. Why are you more on time in the game than you are in the cage? Or most often it's the opposite effect of that. Why are you off time in the game and you're on time in the cage so much? Let's look at that translation. Let's look at that difference between what you're doing and how you're moving inside versus what you're doing and how you're moving in the game. Sometimes it's as simple as just showing them the timing and saying, hey, look, here you got up on handbrake and you're getting forward on pitch release, or you're even getting up, slightly before handbrake to, trying to kind of jump the gun a little bit. Got to be careful on that because the old, Johnny Cuetos and Stromans of the world will get you.
No doubt.
But, so yeah, they're good enough as it is. And then they can all of a sudden start doing that stuff. It's not even fair. But we don't like to give them too much credit, though.
Yeah,
but
no doubt. They still have an ERA.
Yeah, they still have an ERA, exactly.
So
I think teaching timing is very difficult. It's also the number one thing that we should be working on is timing, and that's where so much of what we do is changing the distances, changing the speeds. I throw a lot of fastball curveball mix, a lot of fastball slider mix. I'm obviously blessed with the ability to do that. Not every coach can do that, but if I couldn't do that, if my arm breaks today, I'm hiring a couple of younger guys, a couple ex-pitchers, a couple guys with some BP feel to come in and throw fastball curveball mix. I think it's so vital because sitting on a machine is great because we get that velocity, we get that challenge, but ultimately it's a machine and it's the same pitch every time to a certain degree depending on what machine you have. So anywhere we can get that kind of live feel is going to really benefit us, and it really forces the approach to work within the timing. When we're doing slider machine, I'm running slider machine, I'm forcing guys to understand that if they're timing the slider right now, they're not working in terms of open skill environment. But if I can get you to be on a machine with a slider and time the fastball on the move and then promote that natural adjustment that you would have in the game, I think that we can work on game timing on the machine in that setting, but they have to understand that context. They have to understand why they're trying to do it that way rather than just sitting slider, and trying to annihilate a slider. Because in the game, we don't know the slider's coming, right? That's something that we have to be able to react to, and we're trying to promote that environment when we're doing it. Doug Lotta's, his chaos drill is phenomenal. I really think it's awesome. Some guys really don't like it just because it's uncomfortable to have your eyes closed, but, basically chaos drill is you have your eyes closed, the hitter's in the box, eyes are closed, and then the feeder gives you a verbal. I think, most of the time it's a go verbal. It's like, hey, go. And when they hear go, they're supposed to make their move and open their eyes at the same time. And so you're pretty much fully in control of their timing. And it's a great way to implement that earlier move, that kind of go to see kind of thought process, that what, starts to breed really good timing to a certain degree. But, like we always been talking about in this whole podcast, is it's going to be individually based on what they're doing, what their move is, and then obviously, what the context of that translation from cage to game really truly is.
Sure. You mentioned that you really like game planning, and that can mean a lot of different things based on the level that the player's at, based on the level that the coach that's listening is at. And so let's just start with game planning for big league guys, and then let's work it down to how you help, because you're an amateur coach of an 18U team. You work with teenagers, and so let's start with the big league guys. Whenever they're calling you and they're talking about this or that, or how do you help them to get ready for games?
Yeah, the level of play is going to be huge because the amount of information that we have on the opposing pitcher is going to really change how we can game plan, right? Like in terms of like my 18-year-old team or game planning in youth baseball, is we don't have these advanced scouting reports. If anything, maybe a couple guys on the team have faced this guy in high school ball or have faced this guy in previous years of select ball, so they have a basic idea of what the guy's like, but they don't understand spin rate. They don't understand like the different accesses of the ball and how it's going to move and how it's going to come out of different arm angles. So with those guys, you got to really just kind of simplify. We're going to keep it really simple. We're going to go, okay, what does the fastball look like? Is it four seam and flat and straight? Does it have a little life on it at the end where it kind of seems like it kind of jumps on you, almost has a little bit of that rise effect where that guy's got a little bit more, natural, spin rate on that fastball, versus the guy that kind of throws that, drop ball or the gravity ball or the sinker. We're not going to face as many elite sinkers at the youth level, if hardly any at all. So it's a little bit easier. But, for instance, 2 years ago, I still remember my 18-year-old team, we were playing in a tournament and there was a couple college recruiters out there, kind of watching the starting pitcher that we were about to face. And he was like, hey, you guys are in for a tough day. One of the guys that I talked to, one of the college scouts, and you guys are in for a tough day. This guy's I watched him throw 19 ground balls out of 21 outs the last time he threw. He's 88 with nasty sink. And I'm like, man, you just gave me the key to the castle here. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So I go back to my dugout and I'm like, hey guys, we're going to hit the ball to the moon today. I want you to try and hit the ball as high as you possibly can today, because this guy is going to get you to hit the top of the ball if you're trying to hit line drives. So let's really try and hit this ball as high as we can. We scored 10 runs in the first inning. And that guy was good. He was 88 with sink, and my guys are good hitters and really bought into that adjustment and went out there and just hit line drives all over the place. I don't even think we hit one fly ball, but we didn't hit any ground balls either. It was just a bunch of rockets. It was pretty cool to see. So I turn and look at the coach, and he's like, what did you do? And it's like, you gave me the answer. You're literally giving me the answer to the problem, and that's it. And at that point, you start looking up in the zone a little bit because the sinker's going to be down and the slider's going to be down. So if we can get the ball up a little bit and then have a plan of getting the ball in the air, we can counteract with how this guy's going to beat us. You know what I mean? And vice versa. You go face somebody pumping 92 around here, it's probably going to be relatively flat, with some decent spin. And you get in there and you're like, okay, everyone's missing under. Everyone's, chasing the up pitch. We got to make sure we lower the eyes a little bit. And we're really going to aim more on the top side of the ball. We're not going to change our swings ever. It's just more of a plan. It's just we're planning on, if I miss against this guy, it's going to be hitting a ground ball, off of his feet up the middle. It's going to be a rocket on the ground, if I miss. And oftentimes that plan doesn't correlate to hitting the ball off the ground. It gets us more on plane and we end up hitting line drives, because that's the ultimate goal. I never want to have somebody trying to hit a ground ball to the point where they're changing their mechanics to do so. Mm-hmm. It's much more along the line of just giving them a simple plan that's going to help them against what they're facing, and then obviously the more data we have, the more we can get into the in-depth side of that game planning stuff, which is pretty fun. But I would always just start with, what's the fastball doing? Is it cutting? Is it sinking? Is it rising? What's that fastball doing? And I can base everything off of that fastball to a certain degree. And then really just trying to eliminate off-speed pitches or understand what he has control of and where his comfort is on what counts he wants to throw those pitches in. Because like anybody, pitchers get into habits, they get into patterns. Coaches calling pitches are oftentimes very generic, especially at the younger age levels, and how they're calling pitches. So we can start to adapt and adjust during the game as well, based on what we're seeing and what we're doing,
No, really, really good, and I love that story. And so I usually end with a couple of different quick hitters, but I think I'm going to do yours a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about just an aspect of the swing or timing today, and just the different things that we've covered today. And then would you be willing to share a drill per each of those and if you don't feel comfortable, we can always cut this out later. But let's just start with like forward move. And we talked about setup with the mirrors earlier, but what's like one drill that you really like? And it doesn't really matter the age, and you can make it age specific if you want. But like, what's one drill that your players really like, or that you've gotten a ton of good feedback for, as far as like helping them with the forward move?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of like a two-part drill. It's you're working the same thing, but we kind of have guys start off. We actually call it the Bellinger drill, just because excuse me, every young kid nowadays understands what Bellinger does and what he looks like to a certain degree. So we go feet together, and we just kind of call it feet together push. You got to be careful in like what you're trying to push forward with. It's really just kind of feet together, go forward. And we kind of start with that, just getting them more comfortable with a linear movement, getting them more comfortable moving in balance, getting them more comfortable like timing a ball on the forward move, getting them more comfortable not shifting back. And then from there, we go right into the step over drill. I know the step over drill, I got it from Doug for sure. And you just take a piece of plywood or take a bat, or you can even just draw a piece of tape on the ground. It doesn't have to be a bulky item. And you just get into your setup, maybe a hair more narrow than you normally would. And then you're just going to naturally make the move over that board in front of you. And you can see the guys that want to sit and reach, they oftentimes like land on the board. That's where the drill can get a little bit dangerous if you get some young guys that actually step onto the board as they're trying to swing. You can roll some ankles there. I've actually never seen it happen, but you kind of got to, give them a little bit of context and make them understand that their goal is to make a move over that board with their head, shoulder, hip, knee, and butt, all together, so that they're getting that move in balance, opposed to just kind of sitting back and reaching out. Someone like Goldschmidt's move might struggle a little bit on that drill per se, so not necessarily for everybody, but great drill to kind of promote that forward move and just kind of get hitters to start freeing up their bodies. You see so many of the young hitters that come in our cages are widened out, and they're just, shifting back and just getting them a little bit more naturally athletic just by standing them up and just freeing them up and getting the feet, somewhere in relationship to the shoulders, and just say, hey man, I just want you to work on going forward right now. And then you'll see how that kind of translates over. Does they take that idea and start lunging, or do they take that idea and start doing it with the hips sliding forward, but the head stays back? And then you just kind of working within those, parameters of balance and getting guys to do it from there. But that is a very simple kind of set of drills that we do oftentimes. I do the step over drill in the mirror all the time. We make the move over it, and then we make the move reverse, kind of that concentric, eccentric, kind of mirror work, dry work that we put in to just kind of feel out that move, and see what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then we can take that drill right into flippies and even into BP as well. So
that's really, really good. What about hand path? And I know you mentioned you didn't like focusing on the barrel, so I'm assuming we can use path or depth. What are some different things that are different implements that you use, or different drills that you like for those?
Yeah, there's got to be a zillion of them. There's just so many different random things you can do. We do the chuckets. You get the dog toy and you use the chuckets with top hand only. We even do it a little bit with two hands. You get into some of the frisbee toss stuff where you're working on throwing that frisbee or kind of skipping that rock kind of feel for the top-handed feel. You can get into some modified one-handed stuff. For me, I think that my favorite path drill, it's really hard to throw out like one path drill that I would do, for everybody. But I do like doing some swing stuff with guys where their back's up against the net. You gotta be really careful. I see the guys doing it on Twitter where they have the net and they're having guys hit against it, and these guys are running into the net. I really worry about guys' wrists at that point. Like you get that back caught in that net, and then you keep going. It is, you might do something to your wrist or your hand. So you gotta be very careful there. So oftentimes I'll actually use a foam roller. I got kind of a foam roller not a foam roller. It's kind of like a floaty, like one of those pool noodles. And I shove the pool noodle into like a cone. So it just kind of stands there. And if they hit it, they hit it. It doesn't break it or anything. It's just light. And I put that kind of like right off their front hip, kind of behind them slightly, so that if they're cutting themselves off, they'll knock it down. So they really have to work that north to south and that naturally kind of more high finish. The finish is going to be a byproduct of different things, but it's a very simple drill just to kind of promote that north to south. I have these light bats. They're basically like those really nice kind of wiffle ball bats that are that are like the nicer black rolling ones.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually throw them. We'll get at the home plate and we'll say, hey, I want you just to throw that thing over the pitcher's head and release it. And the guys that are kind of cutting off or they're working east to west, they're going to throw it on the pull side of things. And, the guys that aren't releasing the barrel head or they're kind of pushing a little bit, they're just going to kind of maybe throw it to the opposite field a little bit. So those are they're field drills that you can kind of feel the path and you can kind of feel what north to south is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just so many cool little weird drills you can do with the path. But ultimately, I think anything that's going to be full swing, I'm going to like better than some of the other things. Like the chuckets are great and the frisbees are great and the one hands are great. But ultimately, if you can find a path drill that's based on two hands, it's always going to be better than one.
Okay, I like that. So this is kind of an off the script question, but I think that the age that we're in, this is becoming more and more important every single year and every single player that we work with. So kids are, I don't want to say more well informed than ever, but they have more information than ever. And so how do you help players to own what they're doing? And I don't know how this is coming off, but I want the players to understand who they are and what they do well, their strengths and weaknesses, and to own their process, and regardless of who their hitting coach is, right? Because if you're talking with you, they might be with you for several years, but whether you're a high school coach, you're an amateur coach, you're in pro ball, you may only have a guy for a couple of months, a couple of weeks, 1 or 2 sessions, but they need to be their own best hitting coach, right? They need to understand how to make adjustments between pitches, to make adjustments between at-bats, to make adjustments between games and days. And so what is your process in helping players with that? Because I think it's we can talk about all of these different things, and we do a lot, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, but the player has to own it and they have to go do the work. And I know that you know that. So how do you help them with that process?
Yeah, that's the ultimate thing. I do have a quick story on that that actually really changed and opened my eyes to it. I flew out to California and got to stay the night with Doug a few nights and got to hang out at the cage with him and kind of watch him work and see his work with his hitters. And that was something I took away from that was really like watching his hitters coach themselves and fully understand their misses. And really, like, there was a couple sessions where it was like, Doug's in there flipping and feeding the machine and stuff. And it's like, man, these guys don't even need him. These guys fully understand what they're doing. I would have full, confidence that they're going to be able to take that and go run with it and do it themselves and understand the differences. Obviously, as hitting coaches, we communicate. We're going to continue to be there for you as long as you want us there. We want to help you, know the difference. But the best time in the world, the best job you can ever do is getting that hitter to be able to do that on their own, because we're not in the box. We're not hitting for them. They're the ones that have to be able to make those adjustments, understand themselves, to a certain degree. Some guys are a little bit more intellectual than others, or more in depth. But that's going to be the hardest part isn't that? I think that has a lot to do with the individual hitters, willingness to want to learn, willingness to, put the time and effort in to learn. And then ultimately, just understanding the difference and what they feel and obviously what they see, because all the technology allows us to see everything we do now. So there's a lot of different pieces and variables there, but ultimately that's the ultimate goal, is that how do we get the hitter to understand what he's doing when he's killing it versus when he's struggling, and then allowing him to know exactly what to do and how to fix it. The hitters that were with me, it's really the communication is a constant, open, evolving door where we're always communicating. Sometimes it's with parents of young kids, and we're helping that facilitate that a little bit. And other times it's just with the hitters themselves. Whether that's a 10-year-old or a 35-year-old vet in the show, it's really that communication is always there. How much they want to utilize that communication is huge. And then the hard part is that, like what we teach and what I teach and what I do is probably different than what most coaches are teaching and seeing and doing, or what they were taught. Most coaches, especially around here in the youth world, is they're teaching what they were taught, right? And ultimately, like, you're going to take pieces of everything you're taught and make your own brand and your own idea of what you think is the best way to teach the swings, right? And that's where I think I'm so blessed in the information that I've come across, is that I have so much information from so many great hitting coaches, stuff I like, stuff I don't like, and I've made that into, my own form of that information, and just based on what I'm seeing and looking for and how I'm going to implement that information. And when you do it individually based, I think that helps the hitter understand themselves better, instead of just saying, all 10 of you guys go do the same thing and be the same clone and try and do the exact same thing, and your bodies aren't ready to do it that way, or they're not meant to do it that way. You're going to lose hitters. You're not going to get everybody better. And for me, if I got 100 guys in a room, my goal is to get all 100 of them better. I don't want to lose 10 guys. And you probably will. That's probably normal. But at the end of the day, man, when a guy's struggling, and I feel like it's on me, even though I'm not the one in there hitting, but at the end of the day, I'm like, man, could we have done a better job there? Could we have done something differently here? Why is this not translating? And then it starts to hit home a little bit. There's so many times when you leave a cage and you're like, man, I could have done a better job today. And then the next day is a phenomenal day. And that's kind of the ebbs and flows of being a hitting coach a little bit. But ultimately, that relationship, I think, that you have with your players and that trust, it really kind of breeds that learning environment just that much more. And I think that if you can kind of take that and run with it within each individual's mechanics or mentality or thought processes or level of play or whatever, then now you're at least on the right track to help that hitter become his own best hitting coach. One last thing that I would add to that is I would add journals. I got professionals, I got amateurs, I got college hitters, I got a lot of hitters that come in here and they bring their journals in with them. They're bringing their journals in with them, and they're writing stuff down between rounds and taking notes and just writing little small details or big giant book paragraphs. It's another way to learn, and it does help a lot.
No, honestly, I don't think that there's a better way to end the show than that. That was absolutely fantastic. And Curt, let me be the first of many people to say thank you for coming on the show. And just, man, this episode was truly, truly packed with a ton of information for hitting coaches everywhere that they can steal and take from you. But if they did want to get in touch with you for just anything to talk about, anything that you talked about today, or to get in touch with you to maybe come by or to work with different players, what would be the best way to do so?
Twitter's easy. I mean, you can always DM on Twitter. If we got a decent little conversation going, I pass my number out to a lot of people. I'm not going to throw my phone number onto this thing, but feel free and reach out on Twitter. It's Nelson Hitting, and just shoot me a DM, and we can get that ball rolling and start that communication. And I come up with any answers or questions that we could possibly have. And if I don't have an answer to it, I'll try and find one. And then we're always an open door out here in Kirkland, Washington too. We got some pretty cool coaches that have actually already flown out here and come learn from us in the off seasons, which it sounds like we got a few more coming out this off season, which will be fun. It's always an open door. Nothing's stolen. For us, we're all about hitting. We want hitters to be better everywhere. Whether you're working with me or you're not, I really want the best for kids and for baseball players. Baseball needs to grow. It needs to get better. So for me, nothing's a secret.
All right. Well, I will link that in the show notes, and I'm going to mute myself and just let you roll. But is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before you go?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information, and make your own opinions based on that information. And through trial and error and being in the trenches with hitters, you're going to figure out the best routes with hitters. Don't force feed something just because somebody else said it. You got to try it yourself. We talk about it a lot with all of our fun tools we buy, all the new tools that guys are selling out there. We buy a lot of them, and we test them out and make our own opinions on them. And then from there, we're going to be better off. But, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got came from Raul Ibanez. And he said that, don't think like everybody else. Think different. Think outside the box. Guys like Jeff Bezos and guys like, some of these big Fortune 500 guys and all those guys out there, they're all, doing things, crazy different than everybody else. And it pays off in the end, and sometimes you might fail a little bit learning something or trying something, but that failure is going to breed success in the long run if you stay with it. So, don't get discouraged if you have a bad day in a cage with a hitter. Just go back to the drawing board, and the next day you get them in there, you're trying something a little bit different, or maybe it's a different verbal or whatever it is. Stay with it and keep working hard. And just remember, it's always about the player. It's always about the player.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, which could include Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it on social media to help get the word out. Once again, thank you for joining us.